this is who I am. Those are some of the things that I've done. I started as a lawyer. As I told you this morning, I thought law was about truth and justice, which it is ultimately. But I left the law to use the power of television to try and confront injustice and suffering. And then I went into direct activism and started writing books. And I'm going to tell you the story of how Compassion was founded in a minute. So as the kind introduction said, this is Austria in 1938 with the Nazis rolling in. My father was a schoolboy there who soon couldn't go to school because he was Jewish. And this should have been his fate. 1.5 million children were murdered during the Holocaust. But because of the kindness of strangers and because of his individual life force, he found a way to get on this train that had been set up not by a government, but by people like you, people who were concerned for the plight of the Jews in the face of the rise of the Nazis, and started campaigning and advocating and organized themselves this extraordinary rescue of 10,000 Jewish children. So my father got on this train. He had to write and find a sponsor in the UK. He did this all himself. And he got on this train without any idea of what would happen when he arrived in the UK. And in the UK, there was a family, a headmaster, who was willing to take him in. So he went to live in rural Sussex and became a schoolboy and learnt to speak English and tried to sound English because it wasn't good to sound like a German as war broke out. And that's how his story began. I have to say that I didn't know his story until just before he died. And so I made a lot of life choices that look as if I knew his story, but I didn't know his story, but something in me knew it. Something in me compelled me to really, the thing that I cared most about was truth, justice, injustice, wrongful incarceration, and avoidable human suffering, which ultimately is what conflict is, avoidable human suffering. So it struck me in 2017 when I looked at these are boats of refugees trying to escape across the Mediterranean. Many of them drowned, some of them found refuge. We now daily have refugees drowning in the British Channel trying to reach the safety of our shores. And what is happening is that those that pull them out of the water in the Mediterranean are being criminalized. Those boats that stop to rescue them are told they can't land anywhere. And so we have this twisted situation in which people are drowning and people are trying to save their lives. And because no countries want to take those refugees, they criminalize those that try to save them. And so that seemed to me to be connected with many of the other crises that we face: hunger, climate change, homelessness, and of course, war. They're all interconnected because they're all part of the same problem, which is the absence of compassion. Philosopher Peter Singer, he's based, a few of you have, so apologies if you know this story, but he likes to keep his students attentive by giving them thought experiments. So here's a thought experiment for you. Look in the pond, and in the pond you see a toddler who is face down and struggling and can't get out. It's not a deep pond. You don't need to be frightened of the water. You're just going to wade in and get him. And you look around to see if there are any adults there, and you realize that there aren't. So what do you do? Someone tell me, what do you do? You go in and you save the child. At least I hope that's what you were all going to say. Okay, so let's change the scenario. Same walk, but this time you're on your way to a really important job interview. You've been out of work for a while. You're really worried about money. In fact, you spent the last bit of money you have buying a really nice suit and some really nice shoes because you want to look the part because you really need this job, and you're slightly late. So you're rushing through the woods because that's the quickest way to get to where you need to be for this job interview. And as you walk through the woods, you come across the same small shallow pond, and there is the toddler face down. Now you're really irritated because there should be an adult around. What are they doing, letting their toddler fall into a pond? But there are no adults around. If you get into the pond, you're going to ruin your shoes, you're going to ruin your suit, and you're going to be very late for your interview. What do? The same thing. Thank you, everyone. The same thing. And yet, every day a child is drowning, or the equivalent of drowning, somewhere in the world, and yet we do nothing. And that's really what I call the compassion gap. You know, the ease with which we know what the right thing to do is, and yet what geographical distance does is it creates this gap. So somehow we carry on with our lives as if there isn't a child face down, or a child in war, or a child in hunger somewhere else in the world. And all of you know this, which is why you're here. But it raises that issue of what is the gap? So we know, the world knows what the solutions to climate change are. They know they have the Sustainable Development Goals, which 191 countries have signed up to. You know, we're here at the United Nations. The world knows how to solve these problems. 191 countries have signed up to these goals, but they're not being enacted. It's the same thing. We know what needs to happen. We've heard extraordinary testimony, you know, from wars that are still going on. We know what needs to happen to stop these wars, and yet it doesn't happen. So together with a colleague, I decided that we needed to somehow find a way of closing the gap. And so what's coming next? So we really felt the thing that connected all those scenarios was the absence of compassion. They were all symptomatic of the absence of caring enough to actually take the action that was needed. So what do I mean by compassion? What I mean by compassion is having an awareness of another's suffering. So you're aware, you've noticed, you've been curious, you've seen that someone else is suffering, you've read the paper, you've listened, you've heard. Then you have empathy for their situation. You imagine, what if that was my child? What if that was me, trapped, as we saw that journalist, in unspeakable circumstances? But that's not enough. Empathy isn't enough. Empathy, a lot of psychopaths have really high levels of empathy because it helps you manipulate people. You know what they care about. You can appear concerned. The thing that is really needed is action, and that's what compassion is. It's taking action as a result of that empathetic concern. So that's what compassion means, and where do we need it? Politics. Can you play this? You can turn it up a bit if you want.
Shut up a minute. What's it for? Here it comes. Give me the word in. Order! Order! I say to the honourable gentleman, I will not tolerate such behaviour.
So there we have it.
No, but if you stand again, I'll award you. Make your mind up.
I think it goes on like that for some length. So this is the mother of all democracies. This is the British Parliament. So, and like a good colonialist nation, we exported this model of parliament to every Commonwealth country, and those Commonwealth countries have recreated the same chamber, and the chamber is designed 2 swords lengths apart because it's predicated on the idea of violence. It's predicated on the idea of fighting 2 warring sides sitting on either side of Parliament. So we thought if we want these situations acted on, we have to look at the people who have their hands on the steering wheel, on the levers of power. We have to look at politics, because if we can somehow inject compassion into the way politics is done, then we can start getting better decisions coming from the political space. A lot of people laughed when we set up compassion in politics. They said, that sounds like an oxymoron. Nice idea, good luck. But within 4 months, we had 40 members signed up, and within a few years, we had 100 members signed up from every single political party in the UK, and we have a lot of interest globally as well. So there is an appetite. Most people, despite what we may think of politicians, and politicians are not held in high regard, most surveys show that people would rather their child married almost anyone other than a politician. Politician is lowest on the ideal partner for your child. They've done surveys on this kind of thing. And Ipsos Mori, the polling company, each year do an index to see whether people trust politicians. In the UK, the level of trust last year was just 9% of voters think that politicians tell the truth. And amongst young people, people your age, it was 1%. So we have a really big problem in politics. We have politicians that aren't solving or aren't able to solve the big issues of today, and we have a public that is increasingly disenchanted with politicians, and numbers show that there's a disaffection. There are rumbles. Is democracy really what it's meant to be? Look at the outcomes of democracy, and that is dangerous, because I can't remember who said it, but one famous politician said it's the least worst form of government that we have, and I believe that very sincerely, that those of us who live in democracies, are lucky to do so. So we work in the democratic space. We work with the science of compassion, and we look at how to reform the way politics is done. That man who was shouting, the Speaker of the House of Commons, we met him just before Christmas to suggest maybe that if people didn't shout and use their inside voices rather than their outside voices, as any primary school teacher would tell you, we might get better outcomes, and he thought that was a ridiculous notion. He also thought the suggestion that alcohol shouldn't be served on the premises was a ridiculous notion. His justification, this was a private conversation, I'm sure this isn't being recorded, was that if politicians weren't able to drink on the premises of the Houses of Parliament, they would be outside getting drunk on the street and everyone would see them. So that's what we're dealing with in politics. But there are more women in politics, particularly in the UK, and change is on the way. Change is beginning to happen. So that's what I do. And that's some of our MPs that support us there in the UK. But I want to turn the tables on you guys now, because you've heard a lot from us, and you've heard some really heartbreaking and harrowing stories. And I just want to acknowledge that some of that will be traumatic. I'm sure you all know about vicarious trauma, where hearing of another's trauma can actually cause trauma within you, and that's particularly the case if you have your own background of trauma. So I want to talk about how we take care of ourselves as peacemakers. You know, how do we hear these stories? How do we listen to that courageous woman talking about the people dying all around her every day, her fears for her own children? How do we listen to that and not get floored by it? How do we listen to that and use that suffering, the privilege of having that experience shared with us, to try and move the cause of peace forward? So we're going to look at all of you. So, and this is quite important. This is the Dalai Lama. The other reason we look inside ourselves, it isn't just because we need to be as effective as we can. It's also because what happens within us is often a microcosm for the world that we see outside ourselves. And if we go in to try and make peace when we're in battle inside ourselves, we're not going to be very effective. So as the Dalai Lama says, we can never make peace in the outer world unless we make peace with ourselves. And that's actually not easy. That's a lifetime's work. And none of us have to do it perfectly, but I'm going to talk about a few tools that will hopefully help on your journey. How many of you know what you're feeling? You're probably feeling a jumble of emotions. Here are some in a messy word cloud for you. So these are some of the things you may be feeling. I want you just to take a moment and jot down some of the things that you're feeling, and then I'm going to ask you to share it with your neighbour. So you'll be letting your neighbour down if you don't write these things down. So just take a moment to ask, what's happening inside me? What are my emotions? I'm going to give you literally 30 seconds. There's no right or wrong answer. Just write what comes. Okay, I hope you've all managed to locate some feelings. And notice if you haven't. Notice if you have no idea what you're feeling, because that means that you're probably disassociating, because what you're hearing is too much to hear. You have to protect yourself in some way. So you've got a minute now to turn to the person next to you and tell them your feelings and listen to theirs. Okay, just take 20 seconds more. Make sure you hear from the other person. You don't do all the talking. Okay. So we're trying to do our job as peace ambassadors with these feelings rumbling around inside of us, and we have to know what to do with these feelings. And the messy business of feelings is that they need to be felt, because if we don't feel them, they remain stuck in our bodies and get locked in. And that's what happens. That's part of what happens when we have trauma. An experience is so big that we can't digest and process it. So part of taking care of ourselves is to have an awareness of what is happening emotionally, share it with others, and allow ourselves to feel what needs to be felt so that it can pass through us and not be trapped. I'm going to tell you another story. So this is a story that was told to me by someone who had the story told to them by a Native American elder. And this Native American elder told the story of a grandfather who said to his granddaughter, you know, inside you, you have two wolves, and they're engaged in a bitter conflict. And one of those wolves, they're fighting over you, and one of those wolves is greed and hate and anger and meanness and viciousness and cruelty and betrayal and treachery and unkindness. And the other wolf is love and gentleness and truth and beauty and softness and an embrace. And she said, but Grandpa, which wolf is going to win? And he said, whichever wolf you feed. And that is true for each of us as well as it's true for our world. Which wolf are we going to feed? What choices are we going to make? Oh, I've now put the clicker down. So we think we want to feed the right wolf, yeah? But most of us have certain things that we really like, and they give us a high and they make us feel good. So for me, I've got to admit it, it's ice cream and cotton candy. You may not have a sweet tooth, but I'm sure there are some people who identify with me. And what happens when you eat these substances is they give you a hit. They give you an addictive hit, and you suddenly feel invincible, and you feel better for a moment. And of course, there is an emotion which does that. And that emotion is hate. And we know, here's the Reverend Martin Luther King, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. So most of us don't think of ourselves as hate-filled people. In fact, most of us think we're here to oppose the people who are filled with hate. But within each of us is that capacity to hate, and hate serves a number of functions. And the more we can understand our own internal workings, the better we will be able to understand that the processes that others are engaged in. And what hate does is it gives us, I did have a slide about this, but I think I erased it. Yes, it gives us, hate, has positive payoffs. It makes us feel stronger. It feels that we're, if we're on the side of the goodies and they're the baddies, it makes us feel more morally valuable. It protects us from feeling vulnerable. When we're angry, it's an outer energy and it spares us. It protects us from despair and vulnerability and some of those emotions that we may not want to feel. It stops us from feeling powerless. If we're angry, we're going to sock it to them. And it can give us a sense of belonging. If we're part of a group of people, all of whom are angry, we know who we are. We know where we belong. And it gives us the illusion of simplicity, that there's an easy answer, and things are so complicated and so messy. And we grow up in a world where we think there are goodies and baddies, and our fairy tales tell us stories of goodies versus baddies, and the goodies hopefully win unless you want to give your child nightmares. But the reality is so much more complicated, but hate tells us it's simple. We've just got to deal with the object of our hate and things will feel better. So already, we see the wolves and we see that it's getting complicated. It isn't so easy if we're human, and all of us humans have the capacity to feel everything. We have the whole palette of emotions, the positive ones and the negative ones within us. So, and of course, even if we don't actively hate, we probably experience some of kind of the gateway drugs to hate: intolerance, impatience, envy, jealousy, greed, judgment, gossip, fear, hurt, resentment. So even if we don't actively hate, in our daily life, these things are going to come. So I want to talk about how we deal with them so that we can keep our inner peace and feed the right wolf. Before I do, I want to say something about the last word on that list, which is resentment, because we heard about the power of anger this morning. And anger and hate and resentment are not the same things. Anger is a really healthy emotion. Anger tells us where we end and where we end and someone else begins. If someone treads on our foot, our instinctive reaction is get off our foot. Anger is the driver that helps us set boundaries, that helps us say, no, this is not okay. I will not stand for this. I will not tolerate. But anger can mutate if it isn't experienced and felt cleanly. If it doesn't find some outer expression, it remains trapped in our system, and then it can harden into resentment. So resentment is when things are going round and round and round in your mind, and each time you tell yourself it, you get a little more right and they get a little bit more wrong, and the facts seem even more clear, and it's like a poison. It remains trapped in your system, and resentment is like drinking poison and wondering why the person that you're feeling resentful towards doesn't die. It poisons our system. So resentment means that we have some anger that we haven't found a clear outlet for, and anger is healthy. Resentment is its toxic relation. So, feeding the compassionate wolf. I like to call this slide the spiritual gym, because how we build our inner capacity for peace, our inner capacity for compassion, is very like how we build a muscle group in the gym. If we've hurt our back, we work the opposite muscle group. We work our stomach muscles to protect our back. So we do the same spiritually. If we're feeling really, really intolerant, we'll practice tolerance. If we're feeling really judgmental, we might practice curiosity. So we haven't got time to go into it. When I do longer workshops, we run through all of these tools, but when you find a negative emotion trapped, when you find yourself feeding the wrong wolf, just think, what is the opposite that I can work with? You know, the opposite of negative is positive. So start with that. If you're feeling a lot of negativity and a lot of negative thoughts, start with that. And there's a reason, if you do suffer from either negative self-talk or a lot of negative voices in your head, we have roughly 60,000 thoughts a day. 90% of them are said to be repetitive, and 80% of them are negative. We have, as humans, a negativity bias. That exists because we need to scan the horizon and keep ourselves safe. So we're always looking for danger. But it means that we skew things in a negative way. So again, we have to work the opposite muscle group. Otherwise, we have a much more negative outlook than we need to have, both of ourselves and of the world. So I talk about one part of our evolutionary glitch. So although we're sophisticated and can do all sorts of complicated equations like the woman on the left of your screen, the reality is that when we're triggered, our brain goes into fight or flight, and our body is, chemicals are released into our body, and our brain does not work effectively or properly, and we return effectively to the same way of functioning that we might have done when we were a caveman being chased by dinosaurs. For most of us who are not living in a conflict situation, that isn't the case. So how do we know when we're triggered? And some of what you've heard today may have triggered you. You may have heard people say things with which you violently disagreed. You may have heard from people engaged in a conflict when you are diametrically opposed to their case. And what will have happened is that will have triggered you into fight or flight. And there are four, when we're triggered, there's fight or flight, which most of us know, but two other ways it shows up are freeze and fawn. So freeze is when you literally play dead, and fawn is when you try and appease the person who's frightened you. And we can see how that plays out in political situations, in conflict situations, and throughout history. So it's the 4 F's are our responses. And the priority when we're triggered is to get back into our centered self, because if not, we are likely to respond aggressively and to make conflict worse and feed the wrong wolf. So that's just a little bit of evolutionary biology. So how do we take care of ourselves, given that we have this predilection for negativity, given that if we're triggered, we're going to want to fight or run like hell, and we're going to want to take decisions when our brains aren't functioning at their best. And given the fact that we like being right and eating the candy of hate. Self-care. So this is Audre Lorde, the extraordinary Black rights feminist activist, writer, author, poet, everything from America. And she says, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. So we talked this morning, in fact, I think I was talking to you about it, of the importance of self-care. When I was a journalist, I didn't care what happened to me because I was working for people who were in really terrible situations. I was in Bosnia covering that as a journalist, and we've heard about that from Layla very powerfully here, what was happening on the ground there. I was working with people who were on death row. I was trying to stop terrible things happening to people, so why should I take care of myself? So I didn't, and I collapsed. And I ended up in hospital because I burnt out so badly because I had completely ignored it. And it was almost like a virtue to me. My not caring for myself was like, this is how much I care for everyone else, that I don't need to eat, I don't need to sleep, I don't need to pause, I don't need to have any time for joy or seeing friends because the cause is so urgent. And it made me very ineffective. And you're young, and hopefully you're going to have long careers ahead of you. So if we want to work sustainably, which is the title of this talk, we need to learn how to tend for ourselves as we would tend to others. And it's not self-indulgent. That is what's going to enable us to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. So these are the symptoms. This is kind of why. This is a little checklist of if you're not taking care of yourself or if you need more self-care, these are some of the things that you might feel. I want you just to do a mental scan of that list. 2 of them are very small. That says memory loss at the bottom. It could say eyesight loss, but it's actually memory loss. So have a look at those things and just do a mental tally of whether you are experiencing any of them. So I'm just going to run through very quickly 4 tools that I now use on a daily basis. And many of those great peace ambassadors from the past used the same techniques. So the first one is, how do we have a positive mindset? What's the opposite to negativity? It's positivity. And the easiest way of achieving a positive mindset is to write down 10 things that you're grateful for every day. I do this every morning. It sounded Pollyanna-ish and stupid. Does anyone here have a gratitude practice? Yes. Good. Lovely at the back there. So if you don't, this is a mind-altering drug and it costs nothing. Try it for 30 days. If it doesn't work, you can stop doing it. But I promise you, after 30 days, write down 10 things you're grateful for. Take a moment now to write down 3 things you're grateful for in this moment. Go on, give me 1 or 2. Just shout some out.
The opportunity to be at this conference.
The opportunity to be at this conference. Okay. Well, I feel good having heard that. And imagine if you have 10 of those things every single day. And what it does is it trains your system out of negativity bias. Because if you know you're going to have to write down 10 things every day, you will start looking for the positive things in whatever situation you find yourself in. The next thing, I'm going to have to speed through this, is how you talk to yourself. Most of us talk pretty meanly to ourselves. Talk to yourself as if you were best friend. Think about how sports coaches, the modern sports coaches, talk to their students. Come on, you got this. You can do this. I'm with you. You're amazing. That's how we need to talk to ourselves. Most of the time we're like, why did you say that? You're such an idiot. I can't believe that. You definitely can't get this. So it's changing how we talk to ourselves. The third one is, physical resilience, the basics. Turns out we're actually human. We're made of flesh, blood, and biology, and that means that we need to sleep, we need to eat regularly, we need to exercise, and we need to play. Just think of what happens to a toddler when they don't do those things. It gets ugly, and our bodies are still the same, and our biological needs are still the same. And finally, some sort of meditative practice, whether it's mindfulness, you can download an app, even if you just do 1 moment a day, because that starts to create the space to help you not enter into reactivity when you're in a situation where you're dealing with things that are really distressing or really triggering. And you're never too busy. This man, Gandhi, was pretty busy. And he said, I have so much to accomplish today that I must meditate for 2 hours instead of 1. So try and find that space. Just wondering how long I've been speaking for. I've still got a bit of time, I think. Not much. So I also want to talk about the rightness trap, because just like hate, we all like to be right. Does anyone else want to admit to liking to be right? Yeah, thank you so much. I love being right, and I love being right. And when I'm right, it means that other people are wrong. Notice the word other. You know, we're here because we want to stop the othering of others. And yet in our righteousness, we other. And the danger about the kind of othering we do when we are right is that it builds a wall. It's not a visible wall like Trump's wall. It's a psychological wall. And each time we tell ourselves how right we are, the other becomes more wrong. So next time you're pointing your finger at someone for othering refugees or whatever group may be being othered, just remember that your rightness can lead to that othering, and that leads to a binary situation where the complexity is left aside and it becomes a tug of war between my way and your way. And in the intensity of that tug of war, there is no room for the space which peace requires. And then this is the poet Rumi, who Marina also quoted from. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, I will meet you there. So that's the idea of where peace happens. It happens beyond that tug of war, beyond ideas of right or wrong, and in that space, beyond right doing and wrong doing. And that's where the conversations that create peace have to happen. So the other thing I want to say, because you've heard some pretty extraordinary people, that it may be easy to say, well, who am I compared to them? Or what story have I got to tell? But be in no doubt, if you are in this room, you are here for a reason. You may not know what that reason is, but it will be revealed. You know, I didn't know why I was doing the things I was doing. I then uncovered my father's story, and suddenly it made sense. Marina, you heard, didn't find her thing until she was 40. But everything she had done up until that point had got her ready. So when you don't know what it is you're meant to be doing, your job is to get ready. Your job is to skill yourself up. Your job is to work the right internal muscles. Your job is to feed the right wolf. Your job is to go to the spiritual gym, to make time for those 4 practices. So I'm just going to do, I'm nearly out of time, so this is just a very quick question. Are any of you thinking, like, I care about so many things, where am I going to start? Yes? Okay, we'll do this then. So this is what it can feel like, that word cloud there. There are so many things that we care about. You've heard about issues today in the last 3 days, and like, which one are you going to devote the scarce amount of time you have in between your studies and whatever other activities you do? So this is a wonderful exercise, and we're going to do it at speed because of how little time we have. And it's called What's Your Heartbreak? So I want you to imagine that you're looking at your news feed, and I want you to kind of mentally scroll through the issues that you're going to see and notice which one hurts you in the heart most. So we've got Gaza, we've got asylum seekers, we've got Darfur, we've got the rise of the right. You can even look at your phone, just look at those things and notice where your visceral response is, not your intellectual response, not your knowing head, but your heart response. And you can do this exercise for longer when you're home, but whatever issue you feel the biggest heartbreak or the biggest emotional response to is the one that you should start with. Be guided by your heart. You know, everyone in this room is incredibly intelligent and at a high level of education, which is why you're here. And I've got to tell you something about our minds. They are fantastic servants. If you want to solve a problem, if you want to do a maths equation, if you want to work out how to get from A to B, use your mind. But if you want to know what truth is and to be guided, Use your soul, use your heart, use your body. You know, our mind is an excellent servant, but a terrible master. And in our very overly traditionally educated world, we think that knowledge, intellectual knowledge, academic knowledge is the only kind of knowing there is, but we have to be awake to the other knowing. So find your heartbreak, identify the thing that makes you, it could be animals. There's no reason just because you're sitting in this room that your heartbreak is necessarily going to be conflict. It might be the suffering of animals, it might be old people, it may be loneliness, it may be wrongful imprisonment. These are all to do with peace. And then what do you do about it? So how do you take the journey up a mountain like that? One footstep at a time. How do you eat an elephant? I've never understood this expression because who would want to eat an elephant? But if you did want to eat an elephant, the saying goes, you eat an elephant one spoonful at a time because it's too big to eat in one go. So that is how we approach our cause. We identify what our cause is, what the thing that is most live for us, and that can change over time. And what you will find as you live on is that the things you care about become a huge tapestry, and the things that you do may often seem unrelated or disconnected, but none of them will be wasted in your life as a peace ambassador and as an activist. All of them will be useful. I find things I did when I was 20 that I thought were dead ends suddenly of incredible use. I'll give you one example. So I was briefly a lawyer. When I was a lawyer, I studied misrepresentation. And, you know, when you sell goods to someone, you can't, if you're selling a car, you can't pretend it's a Rolls Royce if it's really, you know, a Ford. So didn't think any more about that. Then started compassion in politics and noticed that a lot of politicians were telling lies. And then I thought, wait a minute, if sales people are subject to those laws on misrepresentation, then why shouldn't politicians be? And so we got a law drafted that would create an offence of political deception, and the Welsh government has agreed to legislate on that defence and will become the first country in the world, and we're hoping that other countries will take this legislation. So you don't ever know what any random fact that you've learnt that you think is of no use, where it will come in useful. So you've got your cause, you've got your strategy, which is one step at a time, and then you try and identify your first step. And what I would really like you to do is to think of one thing you can do when you leave here to take your mission forward. What is your first step on that journey of 10,000 miles? So I'll give you some ideas. If you have found a cause that you care about, you find an organisation that supports that cause, you sign up, you offer to volunteer. If it doesn't exist, there isn't an organisation, you find someone else who can do it with you. You visit someone. If loneliness was your thing, you find someone who's lonely and you visit them. Doesn't matter what it is, but find one action right now, because the important thing when you leave here is that this is the beginning of the journey. It's no good knowing things. You know, what changes things is action. Action changes things. Knowing things, thinking things, feeling things, caring about things doesn't change anything. Think of that last bit of compassion. Compassion is about action. So pick your action. Starting a petition, signing a petition. Nothing is too small. Don't judge what you pick. Pick something that's manageable and then commit to the next step after that. And I don't want you all to feel, it's easy to feel overwhelmed leaving an experience like this. So I just want to show you the quote that I have on my desk, because it's easy to feel despairing, to feel like you haven't done enough. And it's from the poet Emily Dickinson. If I can stop one human heart from breaking, I will not have lived in vain. If I can stop one human heart from breaking, I will not have lived in vain. So remember that and go out and stop one human heart from breaking. Thank you so much.